Janet,
Okay.
Thank you for joining me.
Good
This
to be
is
here.
a pleasure. We're here at the Shambhala Center in Boulder, and this is like a place that you're very, very familiar with, isn't it?
Yes, for many, many years, actually for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we were getting set up here earlier, and we were in a different room. And when you came in, you took charge. So now we're up in a totally
What does that say
different
about
room.
me?
And we've got everything we need, so thank you for that. One of the first things I always like to talk about with my guests is how they get themselves set up each morning to be the best person that they can be. And as you know, one thing that I do is do nothing, and that's my meditation practice each morning. I meditate for 45 minutes after I get up, and it really helps me get in the right mindset so I can be truly present and aware with the people around me and with myself. I'm curious what you do each morning to get yourself in that mindset.
I think, well, there's not as maybe a clear pattern as what you just described, but I usually notice in my state of mind the moment that I have that first glimpse of being awake. I just sort of notice where my mind is, and whether it's feeling relaxed or if it's already has a kind of like a worry tone. And then sometimes I'll reflect on something that will shift my mind towards my deepest aspiration, which is to really uncover some sense of truth and kindness and compassion in the day. And so recently it's been reflecting on some slogans that I've been studying. And one of the slogans is to regard everything as a dream. And so sometimes I wake up, and if I had a dream, I thought, oh yeah, I know that's not real. And then as I go into the day, I don't have to take it as seriously. And so that's more of a view. So I usually start the day with view. Like, what is my view? Or the view of sacredness, or the view of goodness. And knowing that I will forget that, but that it's important at the beginning of the day to do that. I don't always do my meditation practice first thing in the morning, partly because my schedule is fluid, and also I have more of a sense of intuitively following what feels like the thing I need to do. So sometimes it's emails, especially since all my teaching is at night, so morning is like my night, it's like my little time to catch up with things. But clearly at some point I settle down, and it's usually before I'm going out into the world to do whatever work I do. And I have a designated room in my house, and that's helpful because it's inspiring. It's a place that has been used for meditation ever since I lived in that house, so it almost has its own unique atmosphere in the house. And when I sit down there, I just know that I'm doing the best thing I can during the day, so I usually just sit and do my practice, and it really does shift what follows. But it's not always the first thing, because I really feel like honing my view and then following some intuition is how I usually start the day.
So many people, when they wake up, are anxious.
Yeah.
And many that I speak with immediately check their email.
Yeah.
In fact, many have their phone right next to their bedside, so they're literally waking up anxious, check their email, and there they go. What do you think is happening in this world right now?
First, I want to say that it's really helpful to be able to observe that in oneself or in others and not jump to any kind of conclusion or any kind of blaming them for getting that hooked into the device or to the email or that sense of having to accomplish something during the day. What I think happening is that it's in the culture. It's hard to say how habits get started, but there are kind of like forces and messages always coming to people about your value. It has to do with how much you accomplish in the day, and whether it's through emails or through to-do lists or however people do it these days, that anxiety is related to one's sense of value and identity. So that's the hard work, to try to loosen some of that identity that who I am and my value as a human being has to do with getting it right or accomplishing a lot or proving myself or getting ahead, which is then that sense of moving forward, getting ahead. I need to get a jump on the day. And so you're in your bed looking at your phone and your nervous system is starting to speed up and you forget about breakfast or you don't digest it because you've already created anxiety in the body. It's really kind of sad. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that has to be remedied by, just, don't ever check your phone in the morning. But creating some kind of counterbalance to that, like what you were describing. So that some mornings you just say, well, this morning I'm going to do 10 minutes of sitting. And you just start that habit. And don't get too grandiose, like, I'm never going to do that again. I'm always going to meditate first thing in the morning. But just creating some other options, I think that starts to loosen some of that habit. Yeah.
I was speaking with somebody recently who she's a stay-at-home mom, and she has several children, super busy. She's racing them around from point A to point B all day long, and they have busy schedules, so she has a busy schedule. And it's such an admirable thing that she's doing, and she wants nothing but the best for those kids and for her family. And we were talking about just sitting and meditating, and she said to me, I keep trying it, but when I sit there, all I can think about is, I have so much to do right now. Yes. I can't be sitting here right now. It's not fair to my family. What do you think when people are feeling like that? What are the thoughts or your experiences when you hear that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I do hear it a lot. That's another challenging one because the mind now it takes the lead. So if the mind has already decided that this might be a waste of time and that there's so much more to do that has clear sense of result or value right now, then it's hard to then implant in one's life something that is really, right, nothing to do, stopping. That's why it's helpful to be in a course with other people. And then you start to hear different perspectives, and you might be able to stay long enough or enter the practice in an environment that supports it until you get a taste for it. The thing is that if you don't have a taste for it, you haven't developed a taste for it. It reminds me of when I was young and certain things I just didn't have a taste for, but now I love. You have to develop a taste for it. It's going to be hard if the first is like, ugh, and it seems useless. Why would you do that? Reading can help. Listening to podcasts, knowing other people that do it, all of that can help. But it still takes a certain kind of determination, and certainly you have to develop a motivation that would have you work against that grain, the grain of like, okay, 3 minutes, that's enough. Because you're not going to know what this whole practice is about in 3 minutes. So
yeah. Is there a little bit of blind faith that some have to give to it as they spend more time and create more of a discipline around it, or a habit, so to speak?
Yeah.
I know that many people that I've spoken with, when they talk about trying to meditate, I often hear them say, every now and then I feel a little bit better, but for the most part, I haven't noticed much. And often I'll say, what length of time have you been trying this for? And usually it's inconsistent for, a short period of time is generally. And so oftentimes I'll say, maybe a little blind faith, and stick with it and have a strict discipline for a while.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll start to see little minor shifts.
So this is covering, as I hear that, I'm thinking this is like a couple of things related. One is, if you look at how these deep meditation traditions were established, it was not so much about gain, although in some of those cultures there were the living examples of people that had spent significant time, for example, in retreat, in a cave or a mountain or just in meditation. And so people could feel a different potential for being human out of that. And that would sometimes create faith, because in the culture, there were people that were deeply compassionate, deeply wise, and had a feeling of sort of being in and not attached to daily activities, right in it, but not as attached to it. So that example would give people faith. It's harder these days because it's harder to find those examples. That can be helpful. But the encouragement would still be, don't think so much of the outcome, and maybe notice small shifts that are of interest, small openings, just for what they are. And is that enough? Would that sustain you? Mm-hmm. Would the fact that you were able to see that your mind is really busy, and it's busy with something that you actually know quite well, let's say some kind of negative narrative going on, and you actually now see it. Is that enough? Is that good? And do you want to let yourself see more and feel more? So, I think some of it is maybe the advertising and marketing is a little bit too much in that, these are be the results.
Mm-hmm. Maybe for some, do they want to see what they might see?
No, a lot of people don't want to see.
So why should they?
It's a really good question. In fact, in a class I was teaching last night, after we meditated, I said, so why would you do something like this? And I just wanted to hear. And it wasn't, I don't know that people had the faith in it yet, but they had some curiosity. And so here's something that has been so influential, I know you know this in our culture, is the fact that Jon Kabat-Zinn had research done on these practices and people going through his 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course, that research was sometimes enough of both a carrot and something would sustain somebody, like my doctor said this will help, or Jon Kabat-Zinn said this will help, and look at those interesting findings. That's been helpful. And it still comes down to growing an interest in, I'll just keep using the phrase you use, just growing some interest in doing nothing. Mm-hmm. Who would have thought that we would be at a point in civilization where people don't have that as a value? Filling up all the space. Filling it up. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I could say for myself, I've started to notice when the best way for me to put words to it is I feel my brain is full. There's an actual sensation that I get that I've started to notice. And it's as if there were just little things being put into a pot, which is my brain, and all of a sudden it just was full and overflowing. And, the speed of everything these days and how people, it's maybe a certain expectation to in my business to get back to people and be on top of your game. It can be very stressful, mm-hmm. And so this practice for me has been something that's allowed me to have a gift every day to just let that fullness kind of dissipate a little.
Yeah.
And then I know how I feel after, which is I feel like it's come down a little and I feel lighter.
I wonder if you could describe then, I know you have your formal practice that you just actually sit in meditation in the mornings, but then in the middle of a day when then the brain feels like it's full, it's filling beyond capacity. So what's the on-the-spot practice? And what's the relationship of that to that formal practice? And I think this is key. So if you would speak, I think that's what helps people understand.
Well, I'm aware. So that's mm-hmm. the first piece. I notice. And going to my breath. So I'll just notice, and then I will physically breathe in and breathe out. Mm-hmm. And be very aware of my interactions moving forward, knowing that I may not be at my best at this moment. Sometimes I may even say to whomever I'm with, or if it's in a group meeting or whatnot, I may just say, I'm definitely not at my best right now, so I'm not going to serve this. I'm not going to be the best here. So if I'm quiet, that's why. But keep going.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And in that quiet, you work with breath and what else?
Well, I may actually just be observing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, more of an observant. In fact, I had something that happened recently with my business partner, and we were talking, and a similar thing happened. I said, I could tell I just can't come up with a good solution because my brain's on overflow right now. And I said, so either you got it or, let's reconvene tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so we did make a plan because we wanted to move forward, and he felt like he had it. But then in the morning, I did have some clarity, and I gave him a shout, and we did something kind of different. Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting that different perspectives do arise when you have a better, more clarity of mind.
Yes.
And to be okay that maybe time takes care of that.
Time, and I would guess that there's some giving the whole thing more space, like a bigger sense of accommodating, whether the mind feels claustrophobic or overwhelmed, or the body feels anxious and overly activated, or underly resourced, just kind of hypo. Then the question is, do we have the training to give that experience enough space that then eventually it takes care of itself, and then the space becomes a resource. We know how to create a gap. We know how to create a bigger container metaphorically for our experience. That, to me, is what meditation does. And, is that a magic pill for everything? No, but you could give it a try, but that takes training to be able to create, just like openness. And it doesn't mean the thoughts are gone. All those, as one of my students said, all those browser tabs are still open in your mind, right?
That's great.
All those browser tabs are open in your mind, but it's a wide lens, and you don't have to, and you stop trying to do something about it. That already creates the conditions for it taking care of itself, and then for that natural clarity and refreshed quality of energy, and all of that will happen. It's not going to happen by saying, I'm going to click on that browser tab and click, because you can't actually do that with the mind like that. You can practice letting go, but it's not as systematic, click, 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 as on a computer.
It's good. The space is such a great point. And then you talked about the training and the discipline. And so you grew up in Minneapolis.
Yes, I did. Happy Minnesotan.
Yeah, are you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't live there now, but yeah.
Right. Well, I'm curious, what was your upbringing like? And I have some questions about.
It's a big question there, Rob.
Is it?
What do you want to know in particular?
Well, let me think. Specifically, what was your household like? Did you have siblings, and what number were you?
Mm-hmm. Now we get into family psychology. So I have 3 brothers, and I'm the third. And we were all born within, it's like a 6-year period or something like that. Mm-hmm. So close in age, only girl, middle child. I don't know what direction you want me to go.
Went
to Catholic school.
Okay.
I don't often make the connection, but there were some simple things in that Catholic school which eventually I had to kind of reject, but meaning I had to get out of Catholic school. But when I think back on it, there were many kind of moments where they would have a whole classroom pause, like if an ambulance went by. We were all supposed to stop whatever we were doing. Now, they didn't say meditate. And then we did some prayer or something. But it was interesting, the pauses that happened because of some kind of intentionality. Yeah. But then, of course, I didn't want to wear uniforms anymore, and I wanted to go to public school and be in the plays and do all that stuff.
I interviewed Jack Stack, who is the creator of something called the Great Game of Business, which is a way that companies can, it's a process that companies can implement open book finance in their organizations. And Jack, now I think in his maybe around 70 or so, was reflecting on Catholic school upbringing. And he said that he would question everything, and he'd look out the window oftentimes, and he the way he said it was, I'd be figuring out how to invent the hula hoop or whatever. And so, for him, the Catholic school upbringing was both difficult but really a blessing in a way, because it got him questioning things in his life, which got him to really where he's at today. And so I'm wondering, was there any time during your Catholic school upbringing where you were questioning?
Do you know, when you were talking, I was thinking, I don't know if it's so much that kind of questioning, but that I entered when we would go into the church itself. So my school was attached to the church, and then also on Sundays when we'd enter the church, I entered something ritualistic and mysterious, and I think that left an impression, and it had me wonder about things that were beyond the kind of knowing that we were learning in the classroom. I didn't think too much about it, because I think mostly I learn a lot and have through most of my life through how the sort of felt sense the body learns. So I remember everything from the power of genuflecting, or the smell of the frankincense, or whatever it was, and watching the priest do these rituals. I remember there was some, of course, sacredness. I wouldn't have used that word then, but mystery. And but I couldn't know. And studying Latin, which they made us do, was not helping me, address that kind of question or those wonderings. So it wasn't satisfied there. It wasn't really until I became a Buddhist, and then it happened to be Tibetan Buddhism, which has a lot of ritual also, and a lot of atmospheric things, so that some of the power and magic of the world and of the mind itself can be felt when you enter into some of those environments. So that was an interesting parallel. But then in Buddhism, I had ways to ask a lot of questions, and to have my practice answer most of them. Yeah.
When did you leave Catholic school? At what age?
It was around 7th grade, I think, so
Okay.
8th grade, something like that, just when you just didn't want to wear those plaid skirts. Sorry.
You're done with it. And then you went to public school from there?
I
in
did.
Your town,
yeah.
Wherever you grew up, and what were you like in high school?
Oh, that's not a good picture.
It isn't for me either, so I can relate to it.
I think it started out okay. So maybe, obviously it's not unique, but it was probably the beginnings of my experience of feeling depression, and how that then carried into parts of college too. And I think loss of meaning. I mean, I would sit in some classes, I'm like, I didn't know what we were doing this for. And then I didn't necessarily very loving mother. Father had already passed away. But as my mother would say, I let you be on your own, because you could do that. Mixed. I could do that. So from a very early age, I know what it's like to be in solitude. Maybe that also relates to how much I love solitary retreat. Just solitude and being on my own. But what wasn't taken care of was I probably could have used some more hands-on, somebody asking me, drawing me out. So what I did instead, so I trust humans find their way, even if it might not be exactly what they need. I trust they do. So I found dance. And in dance, all those unexpressed feelings could come out non-verbally. So then I learned how to sort of manage and shape the energies of not just depression, but anyway, the energies of a young person. And then later I figured I actually need to learn how to articulate them too. So then that became therapy, and then, so high school was challenging. I could tell you more embarrassing things, but, it wasn't all bad. I remember I'll tell you one thing that stands out. I had 2 close friends my senior year in high school, and we decided that every Sunday we were going to go to a different place of worship, a different church or whatever it was. And what was really fun was that I hadn't known, because I had just gone to my church, that anytime you go into a Greek Orthodox or a Presbyterian or whatever, it's a very different feeling. And again, I learned by that feeling of an atmosphere. And it was just delightful. We just would show up on a Sunday and just step in and be a part of it, and we'd never go back again. And that's my view of adventure. Anyway, I didn't go skiing, and I didn't.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a curious thing. At what age did your father pass away? How old were you?
Yeah, I was 12.
You were 12.
Yeah.
And, the household and the feelings when that happened, I can only imagine what that must be like for a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
But not having gone through it myself, what was that like for you and for your family?
Wow. Well, I can really only speak for me and how I observed the family, because over the years, when I have those occasional conversations with my brothers, they had a very different experience, so that's good to know. So I'm going to keep connecting this to what I've learned in meditation practice, and how those experiences were kind of pointing to that I needed something like a meditation practice. So first thing I remember is that my mother came into my room and told me, and I probably went into a little bit of shock, but mostly I sat there thinking, what are people supposed to do when they hear their father dies? And then I had to, am I supposed to cry? It was interesting in that I feel like that what has opened up through meditation, that ability to let emotions flow, and to let the whole being respond to any kind of experience or news, that hadn't been learned, and in fact the opposite had been learned, a kind of closing off and shutting down, which of course many of us walking the planet can say, if we are honest, can say there's a lot of protective barriers. So that's the thing I remember. And I think the family went kind of silent. And we just, like good Midwesterners, I think, I hate to make generalizations, somehow we just continued on. And without having to have like a family processing, which, as I sit here today, I think, I would have loved that, but I don't know if it would have worked. But I think the strength of those roots is you just take the next step. And I think that's probably also why in these, 35 years of meditation, believe me, there have been times I wanted to quit, where it wasn't so much blind faith, it's just like, I know to take the next step. That's in me. From very young age, I observed it. I learned it as a dancer. I learned it as a musician. I kind of felt it in the family. So I think that's, I'm just leaning in, just moving forward. Sometimes at that time, it meant that we ignored many things that probably would have been healing for us. But we didn't freeze. And anyway, it's the beauty of it.
You mentioned in high school that there was the first time you kind of felt what maybe depression felt like, which I hear that, and maybe we just hear it more nowadays, and people are talking about it more openly. But do you feel, or upon reflection, or even at that time, did you figure out where that was coming from? Did it have something to do with your father's passing, or were there other factors?
I'm sure it did. I remember people telling me, even an astrologer once said, "Oh, your father died when you were 12. That's such an important time for a young girl to now start to bond with her father." I was like, really? And then, anyway, there's many extrapolations from there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the depression was isolation, feeling of isolation, inability to be, I didn't have emotional intelligence. So I wasn't sort of resourced internally, and I wasn't fully resourced externally. And really no blame. I've never done that, because I can zoom out and see the family system and my mother and her beautiful and challenged way of having to take care of 4 teenagers on her own with no job, and
right.
So I think a lot of that had to do with that. And the highlighted times then were performance, because then I was back in this, I had trained, and then magic happened, and I could burst out of that depressive shell. I don't know how much of it is hormones. I mean, I'm not a specialist on depression, but it's certainly not an easy time for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Did the dance requires a lot of discipline, and you were a cellist, right?
Pianist.
And I don't know much about that, but I imagine there's some discipline around that as well.
Yeah.
And did you pick this up in high school, both of these? Mm-hmm. And do you feel that the discipline was something that you were drawn to in some way? Is that why you liked dance and being a pianist? I mean, the performance is amazing, but the hours and hours and hours of practice and discipline,
I know,
is where it all pays off, obviously, but it takes a certain kind of person.
I think in college I was practicing between piano and dance. Outside of being in classes and all my academic classes, I was 5 hours a day doing all the extra practice. Mm. I think I do have a personality that appreciates repetition and structure. I know this about myself. I like structure, so most disciplines have a structure. And so when I put myself in a structure, then something relaxes. When there was heaven knows what I would have done if I didn't have dance or music in high school. There was no structure. I would have found something, because I needed some structure. And I did see from an early age, I don't remember how old I was, maybe 13 or 14, when I started dance and piano. I did see, because of those performances, which were maybe once a year, but they gave me a sense of why it was worth doing the regular discipline. But also, when I would sit and play the piano or go to the dance studio, it was kind of fun. I don't know. Even if I was just learning something and it was far from being perfected, I was just like, oh, you just shuffle your foot this way and you have a tap on your shoe and you just listen to the sound, and I don't know, it was just kind of fun. I didn't care what it sounded like.
Did the dance and the piano, was that encouraged by somebody, or was that just something that you
Well, the piano was alive in our house. My mother played the piano since she was young, and she was very good at it. And she would have us invite neighbors over, and we'd do sing-alongs and all of that. I was more of a classical pianist, so it was a different style than her. And then I have 2 brothers who love piano, more jazz approach. So there was always somebody playing the piano. It really helps if it's, you hear it and then you want to do it. For the dance, I went to a performance, a dance recital, I think they called it. And I must have been shortly after my father died. And I saw, again, the theme is coming out in this interview. It's magic. I just saw these young people, and they did it. The recital was more like a play, so they would do like Alice in Wonderland or something, and the costumes. And I just remember telling my mother, I want to do that. So my mother didn't take the lead, but she never stopped. She never interfered. If we said, I want to take piano lessons, or I'm going to dance. I mean, now I think, oh my gosh, there must have been a part of her that thought, how could I afford this? But she never said anything. Just drive me to class 2-3 times a week, paid for private lessons, I don't know. Yeah. It's like she knew if their passion's there, just let it go.
Were you a good student?
Yes, I was.
You had good discipline.
Graduated summa cum laude, yeah.
Okay. During that time in high school, who was most influential to you?
I don't remember any teachers' names, sorry. I think it was my dance teacher. So this was in the early 70s, and when I was just in Minneapolis a few weeks ago, my older brother and I decided to drive past the house where I used to take dance lessons. I'm not interested in driving past the high school. Doesn't mean anything to me, but we drove past the house. I said, yeah, that's it. That's it. And then I came back and he emailed this notice that the woman's name was Barbara Lotzberg. And it says, Barbara Lotzberg's final year of teaching dance. I'm like, she's still teaching dance? She had to have been quite a bit older than me at the time. Yeah. And I thought, yeah, there's somebody. She designed the costumes herself. She choreographed everything we did. She created plays. She was an example of a woman. Again, this is more of an adult woman thinking back, of a woman really creating a world for herself and really clearly showing passion for what she did. And so, yeah, I think she had a lot of influence.
What would you call her?
Oh, I don't remember. Barbie Lee? Something like that. I don't know.
If you had her on the phone right now, what would you say to her? And don't worry, she's not coming around the corner or anything.
Well, one, I don't think she'd remember me.
I wonder.
That was a long time ago, and there are many students since then. Okay. Yeah, I guess I would just express my gratitude that she created a magical world for young people to learn how to dance and to learn how to, sort of lightly be in a play, sort of a little bit of acting, and that she created such a wonderful, almost bubble for us that probably for most people was instrumental in how they could navigate through those junior high school years, or even younger. Yeah, and she also, I was studying with her for maybe a year or two, and then she decided to take some of her students, and she trained us to teach dance to the younger ones. And she had training where we had to study things, and then we had to, demonstrate and get feedback. So I'm a teacher at heart, and I always have been, but I didn't know. And it was the first person that actually trained me as a teacher. I was in high school, and I was already teaching dance. But it wasn't just like, oh, we need somebody to teach this dance class, go do it. She actually knew how to properly train. That feels touching at this moment. It's like, wow, she didn't have to do that. She cared. And she did things properly, like designing all the costumes and then finding a parent that could put them together. And I think I hear now echoing in my mind my root meditation teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, who's always has said to always do things thoroughly and properly. So if I go back to your comments earlier about, this world where people are quite speedy and attached to devices, and their mind is overwhelmed, and you can't do things thoroughly and properly. And he would say, you need to learn how to make a proper cup of tea. So for somebody who's like expressing the tradition of great enlightenment, you're like, I need to learn how to make a proper cup of tea. Same as my dance teacher. It's like, how do we do this properly? We're not just going to get cheap costumes, and we're not going to have somebody just throw this because she's a good dancer. We'll just throw her in and have her teach the young ones. Mm-hmm. She did it properly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I know you have an appreciation for quality.
Yeah.
Do you think that she also had something to do with that appreciation? I know you like well-made clothing and
yes.
things of that nature.
I do like things. I like elegance, really. I like elegance. Yeah. But I think she maybe started it, but then out of coincidence, I went to this small private women's college in Missouri called Stevens College that was a finishing school before the years I got there. And when I showed up to do a little school visit, oh my gosh, all the women were kind of dressed up to go to classes. I mean, not super dressed up, but wow. And everything seemed so beautiful on the campus, cared for. But the feeling of upliftedness was clear. And so, depressed high school student, trying to find her way. And again, it was atmosphere. I'm like, yeah, this is where I'm going. And I didn't even think, how much is this going to cost? This is in Missouri. I won't be close to home. None of that, because it was the quality of the environment and atmosphere. And it turned out to be good. Turned out to be probably the best place for me to go.
How did you learn about it?
I think a high school counselor.
Was it a smaller school? Or?
Yeah, it was smaller than my high school. Mm-hmm.
So was it a private college?
Yeah.
Like many?
Columbia, Missouri.
Mm-hmm. And how many years were you there?
I graduated in 3 years because you're getting the whole story of my life here, Rob.
Well, that's what we're doing.
Because
welcome to the Do Nothing podcast.
I took some dance classes. I didn't know I was going to be a dance major. I ended up, because in my first year I was in a special class for a kind of like advanced students, and it was an experiment. It was called the Circe House Plan. We all lived in the same building, and I don't know how many, 30 of us maybe less. We were in the same classes with professors that were handpicked for this. So I don't know what the experiment was, but maybe just to give people more of a sense of community, which is another theme in my life. So that was also by accident, because I got invited to be in that just because of my grade point average in high school. And maybe those standardized tests that we do. Okay, now I've lost my train of thought.
Were you on scholarship while you were there?
I had some scholarship. You asked something before, and I really I graduated in 3 years because, so then I was in the dance class, and they said, if you want to graduate in 3 years, which means you'll save money, I still wasn't thinking finances. But anyway, they said, there's a dance camp in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And if you go to the summer dance camp for the 2 summers, then you don't have to stay for a 4th year. Really? So all I knew was I've never been to Colorado. I don't know what Steamboat Springs is. So anyway, I came out to Steamboat Springs that first summer. And then I had the connection to Colorado. Magic, mountains, big vistas, dancing in open studios. I don't know. It's just so transformational for me to feel like I learn as much from being in environments than I do from the technique or the discipline. So then I graduated in 3 years because I got hooked on coming in the summer.
How were you able to afford the steamboat thing in the summer?
Okay, so what I think I knew, but it sort of was behind the scenes, is that many years prior, when I was a young girl, a great uncle I never met owned a sheep ranch in Montana, I believe. And he was, I've seen some photos, lived in a shack, and kind of a recluse, kind of hermit kind of guy. And before he died, he had all this money from the sheep ranch. And so before he died, he had it distributed to every living relative, which meant that I got some inheritance. So I didn't know about it because I was young, very young, because my younger brother, who's just a few years younger, wasn't born yet, so he didn't get this inheritance. So then when it came to college, I not only had that, but then when my father died, he had worked for 3M Company, and 3M Company gave all of us stock. They just gifted us some stock. So I had some stock, and I had this inheritance, and I could pay for my private school and not have to work.
Wow, that's amazing.
I didn't think about it. I just didn't think, oh, I should be deeply grateful. I didn't think anything. Now I think, oh my gosh, I didn't have any student loans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you end up at the University of Colorado?
So all of life, my life, and if most people check, is a series of accidents, I think. Not car accidents, but coincidences.
Coincidences, yeah.
So I left college and I went back to Minnesota. Well, I was going to stay in Columbia, Missouri, and I had a little nervous breakdown, really. And so I went back to Minnesota to stay at home for a while. And I eventually got out of the hole and got myself to some dance classes. I mean, it was like this whole world of college, which was, so rich. And then I went into nothing, not the good kind of nothing, the black hole nothing.
Uh-huh.
And I went to a dance studio, and then I found a modern dance studio. And I enjoyed the community there, and I was going regularly. And then somebody had a Naropa Institute catalog. So at that time it was Naropa Institute. The catalog was maybe 15 pages. But there was a New York choreographer, several of them, coming to teach in the summer. Meredith Monk and Valda Setterfield, and I don't remember the others. So some of my friends at the dance studio said they were going to go study with these New York choreographers in this place called Boulder. And I just intuitively said, I'm going to. No planning, right? So then we got here, and that was like kind of a wild scene. Naropa and Boulder in the 1978, and it was a contrast to, let's just say it's a contrast to Minneapolis. And so I was doing some of the summer dance things and trying to take in what I could of this kind of wild culture, but a little bit wild for me. So this is where my Midwesterner thing came in. And I was like, oh, it's a little too wild. Maybe I won't do all of it. And while I was here, I got a random call from the director of the dance department at the University of Colorado. And she said, we'd like you to audition for our graduate program. I wasn't thinking about doing any graduate work. Why not? So I went and auditioned, and then they invited me to be a graduate student, and that I didn't have to pay tuition because they wanted me to teach some of the undergraduate dance classes. And then around the same time, word got out. I mean, let's just say, I don't know. I was a well-trained dancer, but, I wasn't New York level, but I was a well-trained dancer. So there's a local dance company, and they also wanted to audition me. But dance company? For me, it was like, I could be in a dance company. It wasn't something I'd thought about. I auditioned, and I got into the company, and we were touring Europe that year. And I was like, how did all of that happen? But when I was at the University of Colorado, Naropa haunted me. I had something. Naropa was alive with the discussions of Eastern and Western traditions. A lot of people meditating, most everybody meditating. Something very unusual. Ram Dass was there, and something very unusual was happening. And then I was plunked into the University of Colorado dance department. But it was just sort of in the back of my mind, and so I was dancing, and I was performing, and I was teaching. And then I got a call, another so-called random call, from Barbara Dilley, who was the chair of the dance department at Naropa, and she said, "Can I come and watch you teach a class?" I was like, "Sure," And then she invited me to be on the faculty at Naropa, and that was really where the whole thing of entering into meditation happened, because I was surrounded by people who were meditating, and I actually didn't think I would do it until another faculty member said to me, "I dare you to go do that weekend of meditation." Like, you dare me? Well, she was pretty right, because the truth was, she thought, I don't know that you can sit still. And the truth was, I really couldn't sit still.
So these random calls, because we didn't have cell phones back then.
Right.
So I'm picturing like a rotary phone ringing or something. How did these phone calls come?
I don't know.
You really,
that wasn't the point.
It's
not in my memory.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, somebody from the University of Colorado.
Well, somebody got phone numbers.
Got number, knew you were here or something.
There was no email. That's true.
Yeah. Wow.
Now we think we rely on all that stuff.
Yeah, the intersections and the way things happen, and sometimes maybe not even knowing how they happen, I'm always like blown away by those sort of connections and things of that nature. And when you came over to the university, when they called you over to how do you say the name of it again? Naropa University, to be the dance teacher, or
to be on their adjunct faculty.
So you were young, because you must have been in your 20s.
Yeah.
Okay, and so they had or there was some sort of 2-day retreat that everyone was going on?
Yes.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. It was a weekend program.
Okay.
In town.
And was it in town?
It was in town.
Okay. And so it was a challenge for you initially.
Oh my gosh.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wondered if you would have latched on to the discipline of it, but it sounds like...
I think that's what really allowed me to stay. I think the main obstacle at the beginning was physical pain, and so I remind people when they start a practice that that shouldn't come as a surprise. Unfortunately, there's a lot of sort of guided meditations and information out there that you should be completely relaxed. Okay, that's a nice thing, and there'll be moments of that, and eventually the body can settle down, but it's not it's not a permanently unchanging thing. So, so it was the physical pain of a body that was used to dancing and bicycling and always moving and then sitting still. And but I remember the person that was teaching this, it must have been maybe 30, 40 people taking it, having a really good sense of humor. I think, it wasn't like this serious thing, and I think that was very helpful. He would kind of even make fun of us, how we did walking meditation. I thought, wait a second, okay, I think it's safe to be here. He's like, and some of you are kind of walking like this, and like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I think there was pain, but there was also a glimpse of, I don't want to say peace, of feeling myself without the filters, without the protective layers, just feeling myself, that rawness. And maybe that's where, if somebody doesn't point that out to you, was there any contrast to the crazy mind and the pain in the body? There was a moment where it didn't feel like that. That if that's not pointed out, then it is hard to know what would keep you going forward. I did have a moment where I felt in harmony with myself. Yeah.
And that was the importance of the teaching.
Yeah, you really, it wouldn't have worked if somebody just said, oh, come here, people are meditating, here's the instruction, like a handout. You so much need someone, and live is so helpful. Just not so much that they may not have a personal conversation with you, but you can feel the genuineness. You can feel the humor has a felt quality, and the dedication has a felt quality. It's like you don't learn how to dance by watching videos. You're in a studio with someone that has dedicated their life to it, and then you feel something there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So was being a faculty member essentially your first job out of college?
Yes. No. I left college in that little time in Minneapolis. I worked at a tuxedo rental store.
Okay, that's great.
Important first job.
For a second, but it went away. But I imagine that most that walked out had a perfect tuxedo fitting or something like
I have
that.
no idea. Sure. I was such a shy,
How long
shy
were
young
you
woman.
on the faculty?
Off and on at Naropa for, I think, 6 years. And because I was never core faculty, I was sort of adjunct faculty. And then I could also, there was a year I taught at CU and at Naropa. That was interesting because they're such very different places. And then I was still working as a professional dancer, so I could go on tour. I was also waiting tables to make ends meet. So.
Here in Boulder?
Yeah.
Where?
There used to be, what was it called? It was an Irish bar downtown Boulder, and so I was a cocktail waitress, and I personally had never had a cocktail, and so then you had to know what glass to pull down, like you'd get the order, but you had to know what glasses they go in, when somebody ordered a whiskey sour or something, and I was like, I don't know what glass these goes in.
That's great.
It was so embarrassing.
I'm sure.
What glass do I pull?
At what point did you start to take on a yoga practice? And I believe you became an instructor at some point as well, right?
Yoga much later. So the dance, I danced for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And then when the dance ended, I did some running, but not my sport. Mm-hmm. And I missed the dancing, and then for a while I did nothing, and I was still kind of like banking in on the fact that I danced for so long, like assuming that my body would, still be fine. And then I maybe, I don't know, I did little bits of yoga, but then I started a more serious yoga practice when I was in a pretty stressful job, and it kind of dawned on me that I should be doing something besides sitting behind a desk. And so it was so helpful. It was like dance class in a very small studio. Your mat, mm-hmm. And so I could sort of express myself, but I didn't have to worry about anything other than my mat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What was your stressful job?
Running a Buddhist center.
The one we're at today?
Yes, right.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah.
I think I'm just not. I know that my native style or strength is teaching, and I have a lot of administrative skills, but and I could do the job, but it's that classic high skill, low interest, which is not a good match, but it can get you by.
Yeah. We have a saying that a mentor of mine taught us: get it, want it, capacity to do it. Yeah. So you got it. You didn't really want it, but
I did at the beginning, but
You thought you did. That happens a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe capacity to do it, because when you're not in your flow, I think sometimes we can step up to the plate to a certain extent, but we will hit a ceiling at a certain point and only be able to go so far with it.
Too many dramas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
drama is not something you like in your life.
No, I can handle drama, but every day, and also part of the thing that was hard for me was overseeing a staff and not everybody having the similar work ethic, and and I'm not someone that lays down the law. It's just not my style. So I had a hard time trusting. I should have trusted more, but there were some days I thought, how do I get the staff to understand that 8 hours means 8 hours, not like come in 2 hours and a half late and leave 2 hours early because you're working on a talk for the evening. And so that was hard, and it's also relied a lot on volunteer help, and it's hard to run an organization with a lot happening with a lot of volunteer help. So,
and then did you actually start teaching yoga? Or
I went through teacher training, but most of that's through the MBSR program. I don't just teach separate yoga classes.
And MBSR is?
Mindfulness-based stress reduction.
And what is that all about?
Yeah. If we look at mainstream mindfulness now and how broad and kind of varied it is in terms of its expression, and if we look back at what was the initial inspiration and spark for that movement that created sort of like a big blaze, the initial spark was Jon Kabat-Zinn having that inspiration to bring traditional meditation practices and yoga practice into a medical setting, focusing on stress reduction. So, he's a brilliant person, but also probably, if he talked about his life, it'd probably be a series of accidents too, or coincidences. And so then, without telling the whole story, just to let you know that he, after his graduate school, which was a PhD in molecular biology, he was at a crossroads, and so things came together for him to think, well, I'm going to use my educational, almost like using the credential and the passion he had for science, and bring that together with these ancient tools that really help stress. And I'm going to create a program. And he designed a program in 1979, 8-week program that is the same. I mean, a little bit of change, but how somebody got it right the first time. I still feel so much gratitude for this curriculum, which then, of course, is an alive curriculum. Like there's a journey to go through in 8 weeks. It meets for 2.5 hours, one night a week. And then it has an hour, a day of silent practice together. I don't know how we got it right, but also the way that you teach it is much more interactive, a little bit of didactic, interactive, because he always felt, as I do, and hopefully a lot of people who teach meditation do, is that people already have everything they need to address all the challenges of their life. It's there. It's not something that you import. It's not necessarily something you have to get and you learn things, but then you know things. They come together. So it was brilliant. It was just really brilliant. So that started in hospitals because he thought, well, one is being, for John, I think, having this PhD in molecular biology gave him a certain kind of, people trusted him, I would say. But he also knew that if he was going to work with these practices, he needed to work where people were clearly suffering, because there already was meditation and yoga in the culture, but it was really more of the hippie kind of thing, right? And people looking for a spiritual path. And so the majority of our culture wouldn't be saying, I'm going to do that because the hippies are, what do you call them? The Beatles are doing it, right? Some, of course, but a lot of people, no. So he's like, well, it doesn't require a guru, a swami, any kind of Eastern kind of looking spiritual person. What it needs is we just need to create the tools free of some of those cultural trappings, you could say, and see what happens. If people who are really suffering from chronic pain, from illness, from the fear of their illness, from the way their illness has created havoc in their life, both internally and externally. So let's create a program and let's have the doctors refer people. So they didn't have to, they probably didn't look in a catalog and see, a program on working with meditation. It's like the doctor says, I think maybe you should check this stress reduction course out. It involves meditation, but why not give it a try? And insurance would pay for it then. And so it was a perfect time and the perfect kind of context to get it planted in our culture, so-called secular meditation.
Mm-hmm. And one thing just on secular, I've noticed when I speak with people, what does secular mean?
Oh, it's just, oh my goodness. So I'm saying that because we said secular meditation for a long time, and now people say you can't say secular. You have to say mainstream. And because some people thought that if you say secular, it's devoid of a natural sacredness or something. I don't really understand the arguments. What I say is secular means it's outside of the realm of religious institutions, and it doesn't exempt them, but it's in a broader sense of society. So that's, I don't know if that's the dictionary definition.
What started to draw you to MBSR? You had at some point had decided you were going to follow a Buddhist path.
Yes.
So now here you are with this Buddhist path, moving into a secular way of teaching.
Yes.
So,
I still teach also in the Buddhist way.
Mm-hmm.
Again, who would have known going into a Salvation Army store or something? And there was a copy of Jon Kabat-Zinn's first book called Full Catastrophe Living. So I was just looking at the used books, and the title caught my attention, and I just had a quick look, and I think it says on the cover something like using the wisdom of your body and mind to face stress, illness, and change, or something like that. So it was probably $1 or something. So I bought it, and I put it on my little shelf, and I think it was a couple years later, I decided to read it. And from the introduction, I intuitively knew that I was going to teach it. Because I thought, it's movement, it's yoga, it's body, and it's meditation. And it'll get me into a realm where I can teach to a broader audience. And that has always been important to me. Like the dance world got too small and I wanted to broaden out. So now, I wanted to go broader. So anyway, we must have had internet then. I don't know how I would have known that there were trainings to become teacher. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't going to go, but then Naropa University gave me a small grant to help pay for it. So.
And you went out to Massachusetts?
No, this was in California. So they do some of their trainings in California.
Okay, got it. And is that a 3-year program that you would go through to become a teacher? Or
no, okay. So at that time, so that was I think 18 years ago or something, you would do this week-long training with Jon Kabat-Zinn and Saki Santorelli. And at the end of the training, they'd give you a very thick binder filled with all you needed to know to teach the course. And then we taught. Not everybody. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people there were physicians, or nurses, and they were just coming probably for some ongoing educational units or curiosity about John, and some of them were going to teach, but at that time, not so many people were ready to teach. But they did say you need to really look at these qualities, and they listed them about what would be the basis for being an MBSR teacher, like having a personal practice for I don't know how many years they said, and group dynamics, familiarity with group dynamics, which I had studied in college, and a number of things. So then I thought, I think I fulfill that. So now if you fast forward, because so many people then wanted to become MBSR teachers, and they wanted to do a little bit more, they wanted to, they created a certification process, but they also wanted to keep the quality high, because if you do what John did back then, that means anybody who felt like it could go out and say, I'm teaching an MBSR class, and they might have only meditated for, a month or 2 or 3. They might have seen that list of qualities and ignored it. And although I think that takes care of itself, because once you're in the classroom, you're over your head, you're not going to want to do it again. So now, I don't know how long it takes people. I think 3 years would be kind of on the fast side. It's a big investment of time and money and heart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure is. Do you ever think much about the fact that you bought this book at a Salvation Army for $1 and didn't go run home and read it, and years later, somehow when you were looking through your pile of books, that one sort of popped out at you?
Yeah. No, I don't really think much about it, because I also have some, it's not so much like I trust this as a blanket statement, but I do think things happen at the right time. So it was probably the right time to grab it off the shelf. And
but
at
not the
Salvation,
right time to read it?
Probably.
Interesting.
I have never analyzed it, because it's just the way it happened. It's not like I was resisting the book, like that's a different story.
Well, it's pretty long, so I could see if you were. If I remember, I have a copy in my house, and if I remember it, and I have read it, but I remembered it to be very long.
Yeah. I think I didn't know what was inside.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just doing what I was doing. I was already teaching meditation through Shambhala training, and I was already teaching some courses at Naropa in meditation. So I was already teaching. So it wasn't like, I need to be a teacher, how I'm going to become a teacher of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
And at some point, though, you were out at the University of Massachusetts doing something, right?
Yes,
or
yes.
maybe many times. What are the sorts of things that you do out there?
Well, they used to have annual conferences, so I went to a conference and did a small presentation at one of the conferences. And then it was fun to mix with all these people that were interested in MBSR. And although I serve on their faculty, the main way that I serve on their faculty at the Center for Mindfulness is that I lead retreats here in Colorado for teachers that are training to become mindfulness teachers, sometimes mindfulness self-compassion or mindful schools teachers, so we have many expressions of these mindfulness-based programs now. And so they're all required to do silent retreat. So that's how then my main relationship to the Center for Mindfulness is that I'm one of the retreat leaders.
Okay. And at one point, well, let me back up. I met you, I think around 5 years ago. When I say I met you, you were teaching a week-long silent retreat that I went on, which was my first extended silent retreat. And you were doing that with Jim, and you met Jim in Massachusetts. Is that correct?
I think I went out to do something called the Teacher Development Intensive. So I'd already done some of the trainings to be a teacher, and I was already teaching, but this was to deepen my understanding of the curriculum and how to teach. And somebody had said you should contact Jim Colosi because he's a Shambhala person, and he's teaching MBSR at the Center for Mindfulness. So that's how we met. was the only Shambhala person. I emailed him, like, oh, another Shambhala person who's teaching MBSR. And so then we met, and so that was a good meeting.
How did you guys come up with this idea to approach the Shambhala Mountain Center and do an MBSR week-long retreat together?
Quite a few years ago, I started offering weekend programs, like an introduction to MBSR programs at Shambhala Mountain Center. And then I started teaching 4-day or something like that. And they were slowly building, and it was good for me to teach that in a retreat setting. And so I'd already laid the ground. I was already teaching MBSR style retreats. Jim, one year I was doing one of the 4 or 5 day ones, and I had gotten really sick, and I knew I needed a co-teacher. I knew I couldn't energetically handle it, so I asked Jim to co-teach it with me. So it was the first time we were co-teaching. And so, like most collaborations or coming together for the first time, it had its bumps and grinds, and we also appreciated each other a lot. And I think we knew that it was a good balance, and that we could trust that we had not only the MBSR in common, but something that went back even deeper in our life, which was the Shambhala teachings. So then, I don't remember if it was his idea or my idea or together, thought, why don't we create a 7-day silent retreat for this whole mainstream mindfulness community, and let's see if the Center for Mindfulness wants to sponsor it. So we made a proposal to them. Would you like to sponsor? We'll give you a percentage, and you recommend that your teachers in training do retreats, but you're not actually telling them where to go. And mostly they only go to places that are Buddhist centers, and then they have to do chanting or there are rituals. And so we're like, we can do it. And so that was the beginning of what now is a big part of their offerings, which is they sponsor these different people leading these more mainstream mindfulness silent retreats. So.
Did you think initially it was going to be for people that had interest in becoming teachers?
Yes, we did. And I think the first retreat or the first couple were mostly people that came through the Center for Mindfulness. They saw it advertised on their website, or they got an email. So I think a lot of it was that. And I don't remember how many were on the teacher path, but there was a majority maybe. But now, because of the phenomena in our culture of so many people doing meditation and hearing about silent retreats, now I would say half or less than half are people that are hearing about it through the Center for Mindfulness or trying to become a teacher. It's just people that, read Dan Harris or watched Anderson Cooper or, read your book, Rob, or something like silent retreat. Mm-hmm. It's got a kind of a lure right now. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's misguided because they don't really know what it is. Mm-hmm. But
yeah. For somebody who hears the idea of going on an extended silent retreat, even if just for 2 or 3 days, the vast majority of people that I speak to, I either get eyes glazing over, like there's nothing that you could say to me right now that would get me to go do that. And some are curious but have the same walk away, the same, again, nothing that you could say that would get me to do that. And why would somebody do it?
Well, I'm curious about why someone would have that knee-jerk reaction. I won't do this. Like, it's as interesting a question, I think.
I have a sense of I have a sense of it.
What is it?
My sense of it is we're wired as a society to be busy. Mm-hmm. And when we're not doing something that on outward appearance seems to be busy or moving us towards whatever it might be, it doesn't feel meaningful.
Yeah. We're back to that early part of our conversation, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the question, why would you do it? In a way, you're in a better position to give an answer that would perhaps magnetize people. And I say that because being sitting in this seat, I realize I've been doing retreats for so many years as part of a spiritual path, and I either did it because it was part of that, what a teacher just sort of, the recommendation, it's sort of like, what's the prescription for the ailment of human suffering? Oh, make sure you do some silent retreat. And so I got myself to my first retreat. So I'm not as good as like selling it. On the other hand, what I think is really touching as someone in my position is that I hear from people like people that were at the Do Nothing retreat last year and other retreats I lead. I hear of the power of transformation that can happen in just a few days of being in silent retreat. Now, does it stick? Probably not. But does that matter? Probably not. Because it gives people a feeling for something that may grow. Or it was just, maybe a little slightly better than just a vacation where you're, like it does something, it's something unique.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, why would they do it? Read what other people say. It's really that beginner's mind of what people say who go on their first retreat. And usually it's not quite as hyped up as one would think because they already know the hard work of retreat. So they've already been through labor. And they had a birth of something. And they're not going to go back and say, oh, yes, and oh my gosh, it's going to be excruciating not to be on your computer. But they'll say, I noticed that I could be in the environment with the wind and the stars, and that felt so deeply nourishing and alive. Or I had an insight into a pattern that I kind of knew was there, but now I get it, and I can be kind to it. To me, that's why people would go, is that something happens when you sit in silence that really doesn't happen anywhere else in life. As far as I can tell, it just doesn't happen in the same way.
So if you're away for a week, so let's just say I'm the person who's, okay, you got my curiosity a little. I just can't imagine sitting in a room for 7 days straight. How could I do that? So what all happens on these retreats? Are you just sitting in a room the whole time?
Yep, that's it. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's why you pay those big bucks.
Some do have that.
They feed you some occasional meals. There's not always the same template, but retreats tend to have some kind of basic rhythm. And the rhythm goes something like this. So there's usually 4 periods of practice a day. And practice usually means a lot of sitting meditation, augmented by walking meditation, and most retreats have yoga. Not all retreats have yoga. And so primarily a lot of sitting. And it's before breakfast, and then between breakfast and lunch. And then after lunch, there's usually a period where people can rest, or they can contribute by washing dishes or sweeping a hallway or something. And then there's a period before dinner and then after dinner. So getting to the rhythm of the 4 periods of the day is very traditional, but it also helps someone see that the mind-body does have it attunes itself differently depending also on the natural rhythm of the day. Like some people are much clearer in the morning. Some people feel those evening sits is where they really settle in and become more stable and clear. And so there are, unless you're in a solitary retreat, which is its own thing, you have a retreat leader or leaders who, set up the guidelines for the retreat and usually are in a position sort of in front of the group. And, how much they guide the practices depends on the kind of retreat, but they'll do some guiding of the practices. But eventually, silent retreat is about experiencing the lack of those external supports. Somebody constantly reminding you to come back to the breath. If they did it all the time, you'd never learn what happens when you rely on your own practice. So that's great. Silent retreats usually include one, sometimes two, if it's a week long, opportunities to either meet one-on-one or in a small group with one of the retreat leaders to just ask questions about the practice. So we can hear instructions, and the instructions may be crystal clear. But when in our own laboratory, when we're there working the instructions against the unfolding of our life, and the unpredictability of all that, we sometimes either misunderstand or start going down a different pathway. We didn't know it. We started creating our own instruction, like visualizing or just creating a peaceful environment, because even though the instruction said peace is discovered by just dropping in and letting things be as they are, you find yourself up against some gnarly stuff, and then you decide, I need out. So then you create a visualization. And you might even create your own mantra. So it's really helpful to have these conversations. Not that somebody's going to say right and wrong, but somebody will say, well, why are you doing that? Can you imagine doing that in another way? How does a basic instruction support you maybe to not have to do that? So that's what I love about those conversations, because it really is an inquiry into what people are doing and how they're meeting the challenges. Like somebody might say, I've been sitting with my anger for the last 48 hours. And then, you immediately go, wow. And how is it that you can do that? And so there you get the advertisement for retreat. Someone can sit with their anger for 48 hours without acting out. And they can find their own way to navigate it and to see the patterns of it. And perhaps to actually eventually let it go. But they had to be in an environment where that is sort of, there's an unspoken agreement that we're all going to meet the challenges.
Mm-hmm. Your recommendations to somebody who's considering a retreat and maybe wants to ease in with a couple days, or is a longer retreat, the more impactful thing to do.
Yeah.
How would you talk that through with somebody?
Well, I'd first want to know if they have a daily practice or a semi-weekly practice, or what their regular practice is like. Some people might be doing 10 minutes a day or a couple of times a week at 15 minutes. And I'd say probably wouldn't jump into a 7-day silent retreat. Not enough groundwork. Some people do. Occasionally they get in there, they're just going to do that retreat. And sometimes they don't even have any meditation practice. So sometimes the thing that carries a person is that their motivation is just the time is right, they're motivated, they're going to do it. And then I kind of go, oh, okay. Then you'll probably learn how to work with how hard it's going to be. I think it's better than just to try a 1 day, a 3 day, something, 4 day. And, 7 day and longer is most people I talk to, that even if they've done many, many, many of these, they kind of feel before they arrive on that arrival day, they feel the queasy stomach. Do you know this, Rob?
I call it, I start to feel scared again.
People feel the fear. They want to cancel. I had somebody recently say, I asked my sister if she would just go take my spot for me because I just don't think I can do it. So I think when you look at 7 days, the fear that the knee-jerk reaction somebody might have right away might be related to what you and I, even if we've done it for years, would feel, because you just don't know what you don't know what that experience will be like. Although it's more familiar and you're used to the rhythm of it, but you just never know.
I always wonder if having it be familiar and knowing the rhythm actually makes it worse, because when you're there for the first time, there's a lot of, for me, it's curious. Oh, we're doing this now.
Yeah.
It's sort of like taking up mind space, but now I kind of know what's next, so that's not taking up my mind space anymore.
Yeah. Back to the analogy of giving birth. I do not have children, but I've heard from women, it's like, oh, I think I forgot, like this is a second or third child. I try to forget those parts of it, and then you get closer and you're like, oh yeah. But again, I have friends and family that are midwives, and they just say each birth is so different. It's just you don't know ahead of time, and I think retreats like that.
Yeah, I would agree with based on my experience. And however I got to find out about this particular retreat that Jim and you teach, and about the Shambhala Mountain Center, I have no idea. I wish I could. I was thinking about it.
You don't know how you found out about it?
I don't remember. Maybe it's similar to some of the questions I asked you. Maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But I was trying to think about how our paths crossed and why things happened, because I could have never imagined that I would find such value in it that I'd want to share it in some small way.
Write a book.
And having the ability to work with you. And I think back to that first time, Jim and you were so mysterious to me. I remember thinking, who are these people? Every word, at a certain point for me, it was like every word was so impactful of whatever you were saying. And I still do feel that way, actually. But to be able to work with you, and you taught the Do Nothing retreat, and I'm just curious what that experience was like for you, having all these leaders in the room, many of whom were definitely going on blind faith, did not necessarily have a practice, but made their way through it.
I think one person said, I'm here because Rob wouldn't stop talking about it at work.
There was a few of those for sure.
I remember in one of our pre-meetings, and I don't remember which one of your colleagues had sort of, it seemed maybe kind of curious and maybe nervously asking, so do you know what it's like to work with a group of leaders? And I said, I'm not a business leader myself. It was business leaders in particular. I said, but I know human beings. I don't know all of them, but I actually know that everybody who arrives is ultimately just a human being, and that we're not doing a business training, of which I would not be the person to lead it. So I know what I know, and I know they're humans. And sure enough, they each arrived, and they arrived maybe in a different way than some of the people coming to my other retreats with, a hired private driver from the airport. And I was like, oh yeah, it is a different group. But quickly, during the opening night or afternoon, everybody's humanness and vulnerability, it was a unique group. They could drop in, not have to, show their credentials, to the others in the group that they hadn't met, not that kind of flaunting of anything. I knew that they all were doing valuable things in the world, and that business meant a lot to them, and that giving up their cell phones was going to be hard. For me, no problem. My phone doesn't even ring once a day. It just doesn't, But I just remember, because I always ask for motivation, and even if it was like, I got to keep Rob, off my back, the humor came out, humor comes out, tenderness comes out, vulnerability comes out. These are the human things that come out, and particularly when they're away from home and in what I think is a very powerful center, even though they don't know much about Shambhala Mountain Center, that the center is conducive for people to become genuine. it's that kind of place. Not a lot of distractions. And then I'll just tell you that I've shared this anecdote with many people in my classes since that retreat, because it was so unique to that kind of group, I thought. I think it was associated with a walking meditation. Do you remember? Do you know what I'm going to say?
I think so, but go ahead. Yeah.
I'll tell you what I remember, then you can tell me what you remember. Well, two things was, I gave the instruction on walking meditation, and I said you could go outside also. And walking meditation is usually just kind of slow. And then I looked outside. I stayed inside, and I looked outside, and there was people going, zzz, 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 this is walking meditation, like they were like in this, subway or something. I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't emphasize that slowness enough.
Yep.
But that was one thing. And the other thing was that there was a question. Do you remember what question somebody asked?
I think I know what you're referring to, but...
They said, what's the ROI on walking meditation? Now, I didn't know what ROI meant.
Oh, that's great.
So I remember, I got to feel when people ask a question and what they might be asking. So I remember I just said, help me, what's ROI? Because I didn't feel embarrassed. So I learned return on investment. And I remember just kind of giggling, and then, I go into my inquiry, whatever. Mm-hmm. But I think that kind of, it's not like a mindset, it was just a habit. It was not like, what's my return on investment? It's just a habitual way of viewing things and asking questions. Mm-hmm. And I thought that is unique to maybe the world that you swim in. Mm-hmm. And I think we all had a good laugh.
Oh, yes.
Is that how you remember the story?
Yeah,
I'm like, how about just being with each step, and that's enough. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Right. Well, that's the lesson for all of us. And, I think at some point you just said, I wouldn't be the person to teach a business class or something like that. And you had mentioned earlier on when we started talking about emotional intelligence, and at this point in business, and we talk about humans and how we work together and how can we get the best out of each other. I actually think that doing something like this is the best business class that you can take.
Yeah, getting people to the class is hard. So I do a number of things every year in local businesses, Boulder, Denver area, Longmont sometimes. And it's just like this free offering, and sometimes it's just 1.5 hours or 1 hour or something where you think, okay, come on, 1 hour, right? It's really hard to get people there.
Yeah.
So, and then you don't want to mandate it, like everybody in this office has to go. So I don't know. I think partly that's because we're at this phase where it's showing this sort of conscious business and mindful business thing, and leadership is growing, and people are writing books and have written books, and you can see the value of it. But it's also kind of a trendy thing. And when it's the trendy thing, like I can almost tell when somebody calls me and like, we want to do some mindfulness at our place. And I'm thinking, and I never let that stop me. But I also wonder, is there anybody there that already has that kind of like the deep buy-in that could be the voice to draw people in instead of just like, oh, let's do some mindfulness, Mm-hmm. So there are some businesses that do have it integrated. I think it says a lot for a leader who says, it's fine with me if you take an extra 15 minutes every day or twice a day, and you can, we have a designated space, or we'll bring somebody in and you can do meditation, and that counts as part of your workday. That's I think that would be a wise leadership decision. And you can do it without feeling like you're trying to push any kind of, spiritual agenda into the workplace.
Yeah.
But you do need somebody like a Rob Dubay. You do need somebody that's going to sort of talk it up. Because it sounds good, and then you're in front of your screen, and there's so much to do, and it should be good, but we're in that momentum. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I know that each person that attended, and I spoke with all of them, were deeply impacted by your teachings. and there was an awful lot of gratitude from them and from me. So it was a real thrill, and I'm glad we get to do it again in next year in April 2019. What does, I hope I say this right, Atisha mean?
Where did you pull that name out of, Atisha? I think I know. Atisha is the name of a teacher from Bengal, an old, called it a Kadampa teacher. Do you really want to know about Atisha?
Yeah, what it means to you, really. Yeah.
Well, really, did our mutual friend plant this question?
No, not at all.
How did you find out about Atisha?
I was doing some research.
Okay, all right. So right now, one of my passions, and it has been one that I've had throughout my training as a meditator, is to study a set of teachings that are associated with the path of the Bodhisattva. So I think now our world needs many more Bodhisattvas, people that are really willing to train in patience and generosity and unconditional kindness and deep compassion and wisdom. So in the tradition of Mahayana Buddhism, or the path of the Bodhisattva, over the period of actually several hundred years, a training was created. It's called mind training, Lojong, a specific training to help transform the, I'll use contemporary language, our default network is self-cherishing. It's just like me. That's the default. Okay. So, and sometimes it doesn't mean that we shouldn't learn how to have self-compassion and care for ourselves. So, but anyway, it tends to be all centered around how will it help me? So there was a series of slogans that were developed many years ago by Atisha and a student of his. What I love about looking back at this is that things developed over, decades and hundreds of years, not just like, let's get it done in a 5-year plan. The mind training slogans and the teachings that are associated with it was not a 5-year plan. This went through generations, and that was a longer view. So it's a series of slogans that you can practice. One of them is, don't try to be the fastest. Another one is, regard all phenomena as dream. And let's see. There's a practice called sending and taking, Tonglen, in this, where you take on the pain of others and you give out your own sense of goodness and peace and ease. And so you start to reverse what you tend to do, which is like, I don't want your pain, and I'm holding on to anything I have. And it's just such a poignant and heart-opening practice. So that's why Atisha shows up. Yeah.
What would you say to a leader who says, when you say to me, don't go so fast?
Yeah.
Or
don't try to be the fastest.
Don't try to be the fastest. But I've got all these people, coming after me. I have to be the fastest.
Do you? That's the purpose of these slogans, is that you see the slogan and it's like a stop sign. Mm-hmm. And even studying them, so there are 59 of them, even studying them, I often hear people say, oh, I just feel such resistance. Yeah. Because it's for you to contemplate what it means to you. And there are commentaries. There are some contemporary commentaries, and then there are some older ones. But it really is, for you, like another one's business. One is, don't expect applause. Right? So that's going to work with pride and arrogance, right? Drive all blames into one. Whenever you feel like blaming anything, anybody, you just see how much of it comes down to this self-cherishing. Yeah. So, you get to reflect on them, and then if you memorize something, it pops up at the right moment. Mm-hmm. So here's one that's popped up many times in my life. It goes, the traditional translation is, of the two judges, hold the principal one. So I think this is accessible if you kind of know what it means, which is, let's say you're in disagreement with somebody, or something, there's some kind of drama and somebody's accusing you of something, whatever, but you know yourself better than anybody on the planet. You know your whole history, you know everything. And then you pause, and if you're feeling that what the information you're getting from outside is wrong, of those two judges, this and that, hold the principal one. Hold. It doesn't say believe. It doesn't say solidify the principal view. It says hold it. Be with it. Try not to get jerked around by everybody else's opinion. Really do the investigation here with the principal one. That has helped me so many times when I know that feedback is wrong. I know that person's accusing me. I didn't do it. And then rather than just spinning in my mind about that drama, I'll say, of the two judges, hold the principal one. And then it just gives me the permission to reflect more on what I know. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Thank you, Atisha.
Yeah, thank you, Atisha. Well, I wondered, before we wrap, if you could share with the listeners and the viewers how one might go about setting up for a meditation practice, and maybe we could sit for about 60 seconds or so. 60
seconds, great.
Is I can do too long?
It might be for.
Sometimes when I read a meditation, people say that was the longest 60 seconds of their lives.
Oh, really? Okay, great. I know I love, because the challenge is what kind of instruction would you give, and then we'll drop for 60 seconds. So the first question is about setting up a practice or establishing a practice.
Getting set up, yeah.
One is to get over the hurdle of just hearing about it. So just do something. Try, listen to, something on the meditation studio or Headspace or something, just like do it. And then it's like jumping in the water. But be careful of the tendency then to start letting the shopping mentality, the consumer mentality take over, which will probably deter you establishing a practice. Oh, there's another one. No, and then you're listening to 20 different voices, giving slightly different instruction, and then you're just looking to see what else you can sort of acquire. So that is one of the challenges of a certain materialism that we bring to this. So doing it, and then finding a situation where you can actually hear from somebody who's done it much longer than you. So whether that's called a teacher or a guide, or you just, you show up at a class or some way. And a lot of people don't have that in their area. So then I say stick with a voice for a while on one of these apps and do some reading along with it. But get your butt to the cushion, or the chair, wherever you're going to meditate. And then decide as best you can, maybe just create a 1-week commitment or a 2-week commitment. I'm going to do it 3 times this week. And create reminders. The beauty of being in a class that meets weekly is that there's a reminder there. And then try not to spend most of your time reading about it. Really just taste it. Just sit. And know that there's a lot to learn also. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If somebody got that all together, and now they're, let's say, like us, we're on a chair, how would they physically set up properly?
Yeah.
And could you take us through one?
Yes, but I can't do all of that in 60 seconds.
Okay. No. We'll sit silently for 60 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
so
right. So I'll set it up. Okay, I'll set it up.
Just be quiet for 60 seconds.
Sounds great. And you have something that'll
I'll just say something. How's that?
Okay, so the main thing about posture is that we want to have balance, and which will help the body start to relax. Mm-hmm. So good alignment. But really, one of the gifts that John has given this whole world is that from the very beginning, he didn't do a whole lot of put your legs here, your hips here, and he just said, find a posture that embodies dignity. And so that is giving you both the instruction for the body and the view that you're already good, healthy. There's something just powerfully complete in every moment. So that starts to work with that whether it's in a certain sense of impoverishment or a certain sense of hunger for getting more. I need more in order to be fully me, right? It just says, just take a posture that embodies dignity. So then the next thing is you just sort of consciously decide if you want to explore sitting practice with your eyes closed or with the eyes open. And if the eyes are open, then the gaze is just soft and lowered. You can maybe a few feet in front of you on the floor. And so there's a different feeling to that. And you can try either. The sense is trying to simplify. So it doesn't matter if you have dogs barking and kids making noise in the next room or whatever, traffic outside. You do your best to simplify. And so being in the body and gathering the attention and lowering the gaze or closing the eyes helps you simplify. And so once you start to feel the body, and then there could be a lot of time spent just feeling the seat and feeling the sensations of the body. And so then you just sort of enter that bodyfulness. Then you give your attention an object. So there are different kinds of meditation. They're not always on breath. But that's usually pretty universal that's where people would start. So then you start working with the breath. So working with the breath isn't actually the right language because then it sounds like there's work to do. And it sounds like you need to have a certain kind of breath. I'm working towards long, deep breaths. But it really is discovering the breath, finding the breath, feeling the breath. So first it takes a while to actually locate it. And then usually we want to control it because what does the mind do when it finds an object? It controls something. So we just see if we can just be with the breath. And then you see if you can let the attention, again, there's so many beautiful analogies and metaphors, but one I like is that there's an in-breath and out-breath, and it's a little bit like a wave, and that you could sort of just feel that. Whether you feel it in the belly or the chest or whatever, but you just sort of feel that sensation, wave-like quality of the breath. And don't make a certain kind of wave, right? You just feel the wave. And it's going in and it's going out. And the breath is it, and that's why it's hard. Because you're like, oh, that sounds good. Oh my God, this is so boring. Breath? And usually you're not that interested after a couple of breaths. So maybe it's a reminder too that if we're trying to train being in the present moment, because most of the time we've been training in distraction, then we say, well, isn't the breath the perfect object? Because you don't have a breath that's a future breath, etc. So you stay with the breath, and then you'll notice at some point, and it might be very quickly, and it might be after a number of breaths, that all of a sudden attention is elsewhere. By now, I think everybody in our culture knows, oh, future, oh, past, right? So this is like, you don't have to say, did you notice that your mind goes in the past? And you rehash those conversations. Now people kind of know. The key thing there is that the distractions are memories, planning, random songs, movie that you watched last night, right? Commentary on your own meditation. It's all just thinking. And that's where people think, well, are there good thoughts? And I'm having bad thoughts. So we don't put a value on it. We just notice you're thinking, right? Or big truck went by, and then you start to imagine, visualize the truck, and then you're angry at the truck for interrupting you. So that's also, all of that was a thought. So you just notice that, and then here's where the power. You exercise that muscle, what we all have, is that we have the ability, and then we have to grow in the willingness to bring the attention back to just feeling the breath. So you just keep coming back. And then it's really good to normalize and to just know that your attention might be wandering 99% of the time. But and you don't have to constantly be just like, oh, like a battleground. Oh my God, it's unruly mind. You jerk it back. You want to always be kind and gentle. And you're just like, oh my God, you don't even have to add more. You can just say, breath, come back to the breath. It's such a simple instruction, and that's why it's hard. It's really simple. You notice your mind has wandered, you bring it back to the breath. So now shall we do 60 seconds of it?
Yeah.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you, Janet.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That was so nice. For our listeners, that was riveting, I'm sure. 60 seconds of silence. But I'm curious for them what that was like, and maybe they could investigate that a little bit. And for those that are watching on video, they could kind of see how we were set up and how it kind of goes. So thank you for the beautiful instruction, as always. And most of all, for being such a wonderful light in my life. I'm so grateful that I somehow made it to that retreat all those years ago and got to know you, and have gotten to know you better over the last, I guess, about a year or so as we started to plan for the retreat. And most of all, thank you for taking time out of your day to come and do this with me. It meant the world to me. It means the world to me. And I know you're off, I believe, going and hosting a retreat.
Yes, I'm heading out in a few hours up to Shambhala Mountain Center.
So back right at it.
Yes,
so.
Thank you. And I've always appreciated your presence, and what a delight to actually get to know you and to see all this good work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Janet.
Yeah.